In the future, America has been ravaged by a severe drought and people are now willing to kill for water. Most people have left, but the home family stays because Father Ernest thinks that the plants will grow back if given a little water. He remembers when the earth was green, but his son Jerome does not. One day, two thieves try to break into a small building on Ernest's farm by burning the lock. Ernest catches them in the act and opens fire, causing one of the thieves to try to shoot back. He was immediately killed, and the second thief begged for mercy, explaining that someone had told him there was water there. He also pretended to need to pee and grabbed his pants, but Ernest saw the gun and shot him first. Jerome saw all this from a distance and claimed that he could have helped him, but Ernest just told him to call him Dad instead of his name. Ernest then unlocked the small building, revealing a pump. Unfortunately, she did not give them any water, so they would have to force their mule to continue without drinking. The duo continue their journey and encounter the boatmen, a group of men who have a monopoly on the distribution of water drawn from deep wells by government agreement. Ernest gives them supplies and the men pay him in water. He also reminds Jerome not to anger the men, as they are dangerous. They just want to make a deal and leave quickly. Ernest often tries to convince them to supply water to his farm, but the boatmen charge too much. On the way back, their mule falls off and is seriously injured. When the animal suffers, Ernest shoots it to end its suffering. Jerome cries, but swears that he can do it. When they finally reach the farm, Jerome's sister Mary serves them MREs. She then scrubs the dirty dishes while Ernest listens to the radio and Jerome draws animals, which is their only hobby. Suddenly, Ernest hears a noise and runs outside to find that Mary has snuck out the window to meet her secret boyfriend. The next day, Jerome and Ernest go to Sam's auction house and bid on a robot named called Simulate Shadow or Sim to replace their mule. Sam's son Flem also bids and fights them to the end, but Ernest wins the auction and his debt becomes more and more serious. They then go to the hospital to visit the children's mother, Catherine, who is unable to walk because of an accident. The hospital has a special machine that connects her to a wire to help her walk, and the only way for the family to bring Catherine home is to buy this expensive machine. After a fun afternoon with Catherine, the duo return home. On the way, they see Robbie and Suze with their child. Ernest calls them vultures for using their child as a pitiful card to get help and walks away ignoring them. They go to the gas station and after filling up with gas, Ernest drinks a little to calculate the price. Later in, he brings water to Robbie and his family. The couple considers selling Baby because they can't afford to feed it, but Ernest objects and promises to help them with the water. Later at the farm, Flem appears at the farm, revealing himself to be Mary's secret boyfriend. He asks to borrow Sim and promises to pay the rent, but Ernest refuses unless Sam signs a guarantee. Flem commits a crime and tells Ernest that he will never irrigate this land before leaving. The next time Jerome and Ernest meet the boatmen, they have a good time thanks to Sim, and Ernest begins to convince the boatmen to consider the offer to install water pipes on his farm. Ernest then begins to dig up his old pump so the watermen can check what they have. While working, he tells Jerome that he needs to go out and meet a girl or at least make friends, but Jerome prefers to take care of his family. On the way back, they saw Flem speeding past. At the farm, Mary washes clothes by putting cleaning products in the vacuum cleaner. Ernest arrives and forbids her to go out, causing Mary to scold her and say that she is old enough to do whatever she wants. While Ernest swears that he only wanted to protect her, Mary tells him that he hates his father and loves Flem, then tries to run away. She runs into Jerome and asks him for money, which gives Ernest time to catch up and arrest her. Mary cries out that Ernest has betrayed her family, then he locks her up and nails her window shut. Sometime later, Ernest and Jerome wake up to find that Sim has been stolen. Ernest assumes it is Flem and goes to his house, but learns from Sam that Flem left in a truck to the mountains that morning. It is revealed that Ernest's farm once belonged to Sam and Flem is haunted by what his family lost, although Sam argues that the land is barren and water will not help. Ernest then goes into the mountains to investigate and is suddenly knocked unconscious. That night, Ernest wakes up at the boaters' camp, where he is accused of using Sim to steal their belongings. Ernest insists he did not do it, but Sheriff Caleb attacks him. A fight ensues, and after several struggles, Ernest takes Caleb's knife and gun, which he fires into the air to detain everyone. He ran away while Caleb continued to scream threats at him. On the way back, Ernest found Flem sleeping by the fire with Sim nearby. He stole the machine and supplies to embarrass Ernest. Seriously waited until morning to wake him up with a gun pointed at his face. Then he tied Flem to Sim, who was carrying the supplies. As they walk in the hot sun to find the boatman, Flem continues to taunt Ernest by talking about Mary, so Ernest pulls the rope and makes him fall over as punishment. Eventually, both become too thirsty to last much longer and Flem convinces Ernest to stop for a drink. The drink contains alcohol, not water, and Ernest soon becomes intoxicated from his addiction. Flem pretends to be drunk while claiming that Caleb wants his head, so he only stole the machine to survive. He even offers Ernest money, but he refuses because the story is suspicious. Ernest then tried to stand up, but the alcohol alcohol made him dizzy and almost unable to move. This was Flem's plan, and he took the opportunity to hit Ernest with a rock, causing his head to hit the cliff. While bleeding and unconscious, Ernest has flashbacks to Catherine's car accident caused by her drinking habits. Then, when Ernest woke up, he was tied to Sim, and Flem started pouring more wine into his mouth, screaming like crazy. Flem then goes to the farm, and Mary jumps on his bike so they can escape together. Worried about Ernest, Jerome decided to look for him. When night fell, he found Sim at the boatman's camp, where the men told him that his father had died in an accident with the machine. When the time for the funeral came, Mary returned and the two brothers cried together. They also had to visit their mother to tell them the bad news. Flem picked them up in his truck and took them home. At the farm, an angry Jerome begins to hit Sim with a hammer, so Flem comes to stop him. He explains that grief is difficult, but he cannot let it ruin his income, and offers to become the new head of the family so they can help his siblings. He also shocks Jerome by announcing that Mary is pregnant. Flem has big plans for the farm, and Jerome agrees to let him try. In the afternoon, Flem brings supplies to the boatman and asks Caleb to install water pipes on the farm. At first, Caleb refuses, but suddenly Flem blames him for Ernest's death because Caleb's gun and knife were found with the body. Fearing the possible consequences, Caleb agrees to divert the water to the brothers' land. A few days later, the new agricultural pump was officially installed, and Flem worked hard all day to plant and grow the wheat, which was watered by sprinklers. Now the family could enjoy real rain showers. A few weeks later, Jerome was surprised to see a small leaf on the ground, and eventually the ground was covered with beautiful plants. To celebrate, Flem and Mary got married and had each other's initials tattooed on their arms. During the party, Flem drank and kept thinking about Ernest's death. A few days later, Sam arrived at the farm with two men from the bank. It turns out Ernest's debt is huge and they want Flem to pay. Flem uses his bike to scare the horses just to be tough, and Sam scolds him, explaining that no one wants to buy the land and Ernest got it because he never moved. Thanks to the water and crops, the bank will sell it, so Flem has to pay or else lose it. That night, Flem puts Sim in his truck and picks up Robbie and her baby. He claims they'll ask for the price just to get an idea, only for Flem to sell the baby against Robbie's wishes. In a panic, Robbie demands his baby back and the buyers shoot Robbie dead. They also try to shoot Flem, who retaliates by running away, leaving the machine behind. Sim is caught in the exchange, and the damage causes him to activate a mode that takes him back to the original factory. The next day, Flem pays the bank with the baby's money, but tells the brothers that he sold Sim to Robbie. Meanwhile, Sim arrives in town and is found by Calvin, the builder, who finds the owner's information and calls the farm. Jerome answers the call and becomes suspicious, so he ran to the local market. He discovered Flem talking to Suze, who was holding a doll in his arms, pretending it was his child. Noticing this, Jerome tries to talk to them, but Flem quickly takes Suze away. Later at the farm, Jerome asks Flem about Robbie, but Flem says that Robbie took Sim and abandoned his family. Determined to find out the truth, Jerome announces that he is going to visit his mother, but he actually takes a bus to the border. However, the guards would not let him through because he was a minor and had no guardian. At that moment, Anna approached him and offered to give him a ride if he paid. Jerome accepted, and Anna took him into a truck full of chickens. Within hours, the truck was in town and Jerome saw it for the first time. He found Anna and she took him to the factory, but she only took half of the money as payment. She explains that the return trip is a scam. He doesn't need a guide to return because no one will stop him from leaving. Before leaving, Jerome asks her if she has ever met a guy named Ernest, but Anna doesn't recognize that name. Jerome then meets Calvin, who shows him all the functions of the machine. It turns out that Sim's eyes are cameras designed to record slopes for planting trees and record everything Sim sees. Calvin teaches Jerome how to use it and gives him some privacy. Jerome is thrilled to see his father again, but this turns to horror when he learns that Flem has killed Ernest. It turns out that Flem tied Ernest to the machine and sent it toward the boatman's camp, making it appear that Sim lost control and accidentally dragged Ernest to his death. Jerome had a nervous breakdown in the middle of the office. In the evening, it started to rain on the farm for the first time in over 10 years. Jerome quickly returns and plays cards freely, asking Flem how to get Sim back. Flem, confused, checks the barn, shocked to see Sim standing there unharmed. He says Robbie must have brought him back from his guilt. A few days later, Jerome actually visits Catherine and promises to take care of her as Ernest did. One afternoon, Flem and Jerome hunt animals away from the crops. Flem misses all his shots and passes the rifle to Jerome, blaming the weapon for his failure. Jerome wants to shoot Flem, but instead kills a deer, proving that Flem's intentions are the problem. When they return home, Jerome hides the rifle in his room. During lunch, Jerome reveals that he received a call from Robbie, who is looking for Flem. This upsets Flem and he loses his temper and says that Jerome is lying. Mary scolds him for his attitude and Jerome insists that he is telling the truth, so Flem storms out of the room. The next day, Flem receives a letter from Jerome posing as Robbie. The message asks Flem to meet Robbie at the cliff because he is in trouble. Before leaving, Flem finds the rifle and Jerome says he took it to the shop to get it fixed because Flem said it was not working properly. Flem has to play along to avoid being arrested and apologizes for his outburst at the table. After grabbing a knife, Flem and Sim go to the cliff and call Robbie. Suddenly, he fell into a secret hole and broke his leg. Flem screamed in pain and begged the Sim to help him, but the machine did not understand. At that moment, Jerome appears and stares at Flem with the stone in his hand, making Flem realize that the boy knows the truth. Flem desperately begs for mercy, but Jerome ignores him and continues to stare, causing him to suffer in the hot sun. Eventually, Flem starts screaming for help again and begs Jerome to think of his sister and the baby. He makes a long speech about the accident and regrets, which angers Jerome so much that he finally shoots Flem, killing him. When Jerome returns home, he lets Mary think that Flem has abandoned her and does not tell her how Ernest really died. With the money from the crops, they can now buy real food, and the brothers agree that they can finally afford the machine so Catherine can come live with them. Jerome deletes all images of Sim, ready to start over. Subscribe to watch more videos like this, leave a comment about your favorite movie, and we will make it next. Thanks for watching.